I grew up in Gray Harbor, Washington, in a house that always smelled faintly of salt, damp wood, and the diesel my father carried home from the marina on his clothes. It was the kind of town where everybody knew everybody, where rumors traveled faster than weather fronts, and where families like mine could spend years performing closeness in public while rotting quietly in private. There were 2 children in the Vale house, but only one of us ever really seemed to count. My brother Cole was 3 years older than me, loud where I was quiet, effortless where I was careful, the kind of person who could walk into a room and make it belong to him in under a minute. He laughed easily, shook hands firmly, remembered names, and knew how to tell people exactly what version of himself they wanted to see. My parents adored that about him. My father, Russell, used to say Cole had the makings of a real man, which in our family meant confidence, charm, and the ability to command attention without ever having to ask for it. My mother, Dana, orbited him like he was the sun, and the rest of us were just weather. I was the opposite of Cole in every visible way. I preferred manuals to small talk, maps to gossip, quiet to performance. While he learned engines and fishing routes from my father, I sat on the back steps, studying cloud cover and wind patterns, building model aircraft from cheap kits and dreaming about a life beyond the harbor. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't troubled. I was just different. And in my family, different was always interpreted as disappointing. By the time I was 12, I already understood that praise in our house had to be earned in a language I didn't speak. When Cole hit a game-winning double, we went out for burgers. When I won a statewide engineering competition for a homemade distress beacon, my father glanced at the certificate and asked whether I'd remembered to take the trash out. I learned early that neglect does not always arrive as cruelty. Sometimes it arrives as a shrug, as a missed event, as the steady repetition of someone else being chosen first, until you stop expecting your own turn. I stopped asking them to come to my school competitions. I stopped waiting at the window on nights I had something to celebrate. I poured everything into school instead, into aerodynamics, physics, meteorology, anything that might one day become a door out. Flying made sense to me in a way people rarely did. Aircraft obeyed laws, weather could be studied, systems could be trusted if you learned them well enough. Human love, on the other hand, seemed to be distributed in my family according to rules no one ever explained. The first time things shifted was the day I got accepted into an elite rescue pilot training program. I still remember the envelope in my hands, my pulse in my throat, my mother reading the first line twice because she thought she'd misunderstood it. My father took the letter from her, read it silently at the kitchen table, and looked up at me with an expression so unfamiliar it took me a second to identify it. Pride. Not full, not warm, not the kind that wraps around you and stays, but real enough that I felt it hit me like sunlight after years underground. He tapped the page once and said, "So you're really going to fly the kind of missions that bring people home?" It was only one sentence, but I lived on it for months. My mother called relatives that night. She used my name in the same excited tone she usually reserved for Cole. At dinner, I caught my brother watching me across the table. He was smiling, but it was a thin smile, the kind that never reached the eyes. I told myself I was imagining it. I wanted so badly to believe that succeeding had made me visible instead of threatening. For a little while, Cole acted like the brother I had always wished for. He called more often, asked about my instructors, my classes, the structure of the program, where I might be stationed after completion. He remembered details, followed up on things I had mentioned, listened in a way that felt almost generous. I mistook his interest for support. Looking back, I can see exactly what he was doing. He was gathering material. He was learning the shape of my life so he could counterfeit it later. But at the time, I was too grateful to be suspicious. When you've been starved for affection, even counterfeit tenderness feels nourishing. Then Leah got sick. Leah Ortiz was my closest friend in the program, the person who sat next to me through simulations, shared vending machine dinners with me on late nights, and once stayed awake with me until dawn when I was convinced I was going to wash out after a brutal evaluation week. She was the kind of friend who made hard things survivable. When she was diagnosed with acute leukemia, it was sudden and savage. One week she was running drills beside me, and the next she was in a hospital bed with tubes in both arms and a treatment plan that sounded like a war briefing. She had almost no family support nearby, and when testing showed I was a bone marrow match, the decision felt immediate. I went to command, explained everything, filed the paperwork, and received an official medical deferment from the next phase of training so I could donate and recover. My place in the program would be held. My record stayed clean. The process was documented down to the signature line. It was not dramatic. It was responsible. It was exactly what I should have done. I called Cole from outside the hospital housing complex the night the deferment was approved. I was exhausted, scared for Leah, and desperate for someone in my family to be decent. He sounded sympathetic in a way that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. He told me to take care of my friend and said he would explain everything to Mom and Dad so they wouldn't worry. 3 days later, my father called me just before midnight and accused me of failing out, drinking too much, stealing money from a roommate, and lying to the family for months. I remember pressing my hand against the concrete wall beside me because my legs stopped feeling reliable. I told him none of it was true. I told him I had deferment papers, command approval, medical documentation. He told me Cole had shown them messages. My mother got on the phone crying and asked me how I could humiliate them like this. I kept trying to explain, but they had already chosen their version. That was the part that broke me most. Not that Cole lied, that my parents found his lie more believable than my voice. My father ended the call by telling me not to come home until I was ready to tell the truth. Then he hung up, and in 4 minutes my family became a locked door. I stood there in the cold with my phone in my hand, Leah asleep upstairs, and the full weight of what had just happened settling into my chest. My brother had not simply lied about me. He had found the exact story my parents were willing to accept, and he had handed it to them like a gift. I tried to fix it at first. That is the part people always underestimate when they hear a story like mine. They imagine a clean break, some cinematic moment where I lift my chin, choose myself, and walk away without looking back. That is not what happened. What happened was messier and far more humiliating. Over the next week, I called home 12 times. The first few calls rang until voicemail. Then my father blocked me. My mother lasted 2 more days before she blocked me too. I sent emails with attachments so complete and orderly they could have been submitted as legal exhibits. My deferment approval, the medical documentation, a letter from command confirming my standing in the program, even a note from the hospital coordinator that verified my marrow donation without violating Leah's privacy. I wrote a handwritten letter to the house, pages and pages of explanation in my neatest print, and mailed it certified because I wanted proof it arrived. It came back unopened with a hard red stamp across the front, as if even my handwriting had become something contaminated. I called my Aunt Bev, and she tried to intervene, but my father shut her down the way he shut everything down once he had decided he was right. By the end of that week, I understood something I had spent most of my life resisting. Truth was not the deciding factor in my family. Narrative was. And Cole had gotten to them first. Leah's transplant went forward anyway, because real crises do not pause to make room for your private heartbreak. I donated marrow, spent days recovering in a blur of pain and exhaustion, and then sat beside Leah through the ugliest stretch of her treatment, when her skin looked gray under hospital lights, and every nurse's expression made me search their faces for answers they would not say out loud. I did not tell her the full story about my parents until later, when she was strong enough to sit up and insult the broth they kept serving her. When I finally did, she stared at me for a long moment and said, "Then be done begging people to recognize a version of you they never bothered to learn." It was not gentle, but Leah never mistook softness for kindness. She was right. I had spent my whole life trying to earn understanding from people who preferred convenience over truth. Once I saw that clearly, something in me shifted. It did not heal me. I was nowhere near healed. But it hardened a line inside me in the best possible way. When my recovery period ended, I re-entered training with a kind of focus I had never had before. Before all of this, I had wanted to succeed partly for myself and partly because some part of me still believed accomplishment might drag my family into loving me correctly. Afterward, that illusion burned off. I trained for me, for the work, for the person I wanted to become, whether anyone clapped for it or not. I studied until my eyes blurred. I volunteered for extra simulator hours. I learned night navigation, sea rescue protocols, emergency extraction procedure, instrument recovery in weather conditions that made lesser pilots sweat through their uniforms. Flying stopped being a dream and became a discipline, then a refuge, then something close to identity. In the air, systems responded to skill. Wind did not care who your parents favored. Altitude did not bend for lies. The aircraft either trusted your hands or it did not, and over time, mine became hands that could be trusted. That mattered to me more than any approval I had once chased at home. The day I earned my rescue wings, the airfield was bright with the thin, sharp light that makes everything look more significant than it is. Families stood in clusters near the ceremony area, holding flowers, cameras, folded programs. There were children on shoulders, mothers fixing collars, fathers gripping their grown sons' backs with pride they did not bother to hide. I kept glancing toward the gate, even though I knew better. Hope can be embarrassingly persistent long after reason has left the room. Aunt Bev was the only family member who came. She wore a blue coat too warm for the weather, cried before the ceremony even started, and hugged me so fiercely afterward that the metal on my uniform pressed between us. I let myself feel the ache of who was missing, but only for a minute. Then I looked down at the insignia pinned to me, at the evidence of everything I had survived to stand there, and I made myself understand that no one had the power to make this moment smaller than it was. Not Cole, not my parents, not the town that had always seen me through secondhand stories. I had done something extraordinary, and whether they witnessed it or not, changed nothing about its truth. I was stationed along the coast after that, moving through a life built on callouts, storm briefings, emergency launches, and the strange compressed intimacy that forms between people who trust one another in disaster. I learned how to read panic in a voice-over radio static, how to lower into black water at night, how to make decisions when every option carried risk and time was its own enemy. The work was unforgiving, but it was honest. Honest work can save a person in ways therapy has to catch up to later. I built friendships that felt sturdier than blood. I learned how to sleep in fragments and laugh in ugly weather and drink bad coffee at 4 a.m. with people who had seen me at my most exhausted and respected me anyway. Somewhere in those years, I stopped waiting for my phone to light up with my mother's number. I stopped rehearsing explanations in the shower. I stopped imagining dramatic reconciliations at grocery stores or funerals or holidays. The wound did not vanish, but scar tissue formed where open grief had been. And scar tissue, for all its stiffness, is proof of survival. Cole, meanwhile, did not let the lie sit still. That part I learned gradually through Aunt Bev, who fed me information in careful doses as if she were afraid too much truth at once would do fresh damage. He told relatives I had washed out of training and was too embarrassed to admit it. He told people at the marina I had borrowed money and vanished. He told my grandmother I was going through something and did not want to talk to anyone. He used concern as camouflage, the same way manipulative people always do when they want credit for carrying a rumor they started themselves. What made it effective was not just his talent for performance, though he had plenty of that. It was the fact that my silence made his version easier to believe. I was away. I was busy. I was no longer there to contradict him in real time. By the time a story goes unchallenged for long enough, people start defending it as if they discovered it themselves. That is how lies grow roots. And then, as if life had decided I had endured enough emptiness for one season, I met Noah Mercer. It happened in the least romantic way possible, which is probably why I trusted it. He was a marine mechanic contracted to work with our unit, broad-shouldered, grease on his hands, dry humor sharp enough to make me laugh on days I had forgotten I could. The first real conversation we had was over a stubborn winch motor I was absolutely convinced I understood and absolutely did not. He watched me struggle with it for a full 30 seconds before saying, "You know, Confidence is attractive, but it is not technically a repair strategy. I should have been annoyed. Instead, I laughed so hard I had to sit down on the hangar step. Noah did not press. He never pushed his way into my life the way some people do. He just kept showing up with steadiness, with practical kindness, with the remarkable ability to treat my competence as normal instead of threatening. Loving him did not feel like rescue. It felt like recognition. That difference changed everything. By the end of those 6 years, I had built a life my family knew nothing about. Hard-won, stable, full of people who chose me without needing to be convinced. And though I did not know it yet, that life was about to collide with the one I had left behind in the most dramatic way possible. The night everything cracked open started like 100 other nights in Coastal Rescue. Dark, wet, and loud with weather. December on the Washington coast has a particular kind of violence to it. The wind does not blow so much as shove, and the rain comes at the windows sideways like it has a personal grievance. I was asleep for maybe 2 hours when the duty phone went off at 2:11 a.m., slicing straight through the room. Noah stirred beside me, half awake, and I was already out of bed before the second ring finished. Training does that to you. Urgency stops feeling dramatic and starts feeling procedural. I pulled on jeans, thermal layers, my flight suit, and answered the call while I was zipping my boots. Fishing vessel overdue. Distress signal partial and broken. Possible hull breach near Blacktooth Shoal. 2 aboard, maybe 3. Last transmission too distorted to confirm. Weather deteriorating, launch window narrow. By the time dispatch gave me the vessel name, I was halfway to the door. Then I stopped so fast my shoulder hit the frame. The Caroline June. My brother's boat. For 3 or 4 seconds, the entire world went soundless inside my own body. Not the room. The room still had rain on the glass, Noah asking what was wrong. Hippo. Not a dog in this story. I corrected myself automatically, because shock does strange things to the mind, just the house settling in the wind. But inside me, everything went white and still. Then the white burned off, and what was left was muscle memory. I asked for coordinates, fuel estimates, sea state, Coast Guard support, and whether local Marine Patrol had visual contact. They didn't. I told dispatch I was on my way. The operations center was already lit up when I got there. Radios hissing, weather data updating in angry blocks across the wall monitors, crew moving with the clipped efficiency that only comes when everybody understands the next hour may decide who lives. I was scanning the board when the front doors flew open so hard, one of them bounced off the stopper. My parents came in with the storm still on them. My mother in a raincoat thrown over pajama pants. My father in a jacket he hadn't fully zipped. Both of them carrying that raw, helpless fear people wear when they are too close to losing someone. The specialist at the front desk looked up and asked who they were there for. "My son," my father snapped, voice already fraying. "Cole Vale. His boat is out there. Who's in charge?" The specialist glanced at the mission board, then toward me. "Commander Vale is leading the launch." My father turned before the sentence was even fully finished. For a moment, he didn't recognize me. That was the part that lodged like a splinter. I was standing 15 feet away in a flight suit with reflective tape, mission patch on my shoulder, my last name stitched over my chest in bold letters, and still there was a half second where his brain refused the shape in front of him. Then recognition hit. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stared at the name tape, then at my face, then back at the name tape again, like it might rearrange into something easier to live with. "Marin?" my mother said, but it came out like a question asked in church. I kept my voice level because I had an aircraft to launch, and because if I let myself feel even 1 inch of what was moving through me, I would lose precious time. "I'm mission lead tonight," I said. "We're going after him now." Dad blinked hard. You do this?" "Yes." "You're the commander?" "Yes." He opened his mouth again, probably to say Bever. But Cole told us, probably to start tugging at the first loose thread of the lie that had wrapped around all of us for 6 years. But I cut it off with the only thing that mattered. Not now. Then I turned and walked toward the hangar. The flight out was brutal. Rain hammered the windshield so hard it blurred the searchlights. The helicopter bucked in the crosswinds, and every instrument check felt like a negotiation with the night. We had a local charter captain trying to relay possible visual contact through broken radio bursts, but conditions were so bad that every update sounded like it was being shouted from the bottom of a well. The shoals near Blacktooth are treacherous in good weather. In a winter storm, they are a machine built to break boats into lessons. We found the Caroline June by light reflection first, not shape, something metallic catching our beam between black swells. Then the hull rolled into view, half-canted, low in the water, one navigation light dead, deck slick with spray and debris. My brother was lashed to the port rail with a length of rope, one arm moving weakly, head bloodied, leg pinned under twisted metal. His deckhand was crumpled near the stern, not moving enough for my comfort. I leaned out as far as safety allowed, directed the searchlight, and for one impossible second Cole looked up through rain and rotor wash and saw me. I know he did. Even through all that chaos, I watched the recognition hit his face. Not relief. Not exactly. Something more jagged. The realization that the person holding the line between him and the ocean was the sister he had buried alive in every other way. If I live to be 90, I will never forget that look. We got the deckhand first because he was closer to going under. Then we came back for Cole. The hoist was difficult, the kind that leaves bruises in places you do not notice until the next day. The boat kept shifting under us. The cable swung twice, and one wrong move would have slammed him into the hull. I heard my own voice over comms, calm and flat in all business, the same tone I use in every mission when fear is a luxury I cannot afford. Angle left. Hold. Bring him up slow. Watch the leg. Easy. Easy. By the time we got him inside, Cole was semi-conscious and shaking so hard his teeth were knocking together. Blood and salt water had made a mask of his face. I checked his airway, pressed gauze to the head wound, barked vitals to the medic, and never once called my brother. In that aircraft, he was not family. He was a survivor with a dropping core temperature and a rapidly narrowing margin for error. That distance saved us both. When we landed at the hospital pad inland and transferred both men to trauma, dawn was still hours away. My gloves were wet through. My shoulder burned. My jaw hurt from how hard I'd clenched it during the extraction. I stripped off the flight helmet and walked back into the waiting area where my parents stood frozen under fluorescent lights, exactly where I had left them. My mother took one step toward me before stopping, as if she no longer trusted herself to guess what I would allow. My father looked older than he had 3 hours earlier, the kind of aging that comes not from time but from certainty collapsing all at once. "He's alive," I said before either of them could speak. "Hypothermia, leg trauma, head lacerations, but he's alive." My mother started crying immediately. My father swallowed and said the only thing he seemed capable of saying. "You really did save him." I looked him straight in the face and let the silence sharpen before I answered. "Yes," I said. "I did." And in the quiet that followed before the explanations and apologies and ruined truths came rushing in, we all stood there inside the first clean crack of the lie that had governed our family for 6 years. What happened after the rescue was not explosive in the way people imagine when they hear the phrase, "the truth came out." There was no dramatic confession in a crowded room, no perfectly timed breakdown where everyone suddenly understood everything at once. Real collapse is slower than that. It sounds like silence between hospital monitors, like a mother reading an old email with both hands shaking, like a father staring too long at a wall because looking at his daughter is suddenly harder than looking away. Aunt Bev arrived at the hospital just after dawn, still wearing the same fleece she throws on for everything from grocery runs to funerals, carrying a canvas tote bag that looked ordinary until she unzipped it and started laying years of proof across a plastic waiting room table. Printed copies of the emails I had sent 6 years earlier. My official deferment papers. A letter from command confirming I had remained in good standing. A copy of the program from my winging ceremony. A Christmas card my mother had sent back unopened. And then, finally, the thing that ended whatever room for denial still existed. A screenshot of a text Cole had sent Aunt Bev 5 years ago after she attended my ceremony without telling my parents. "Don't tell them she made it. They've finally accepted who she really is." I watched my father read that line twice, then a third time, as if repetition might somehow change the words. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before, low and cracked and almost animal. It was grief. Yes, but not the clean kind people feel when something is taken from them. This was the grief of realizing they had helped do the taking. Cole woke up later that morning in a room on the trauma floor, bruised, stitched, and far more fragile looking than I had ever seen him. The hospital had cleaned him up enough that his face no longer looked like it belonged to a stranger pulled from black water, and somehow that made what he had done feel even worse. It is easier to hate the dramatic version of someone than the ordinary one. I stood at the foot of his bed while he looked from my face to the uniform folded over the chair in the corner, then back again, and I could see the pieces connecting in his head the same way they had connected in my parents'. I let him sit in that recognition for a moment before I spoke. I did not yell. I did not need to. "I have one question," I said. "Why?" He stared at the blanket for so long I almost thought he would refuse to answer, but when he finally did, his voice sounded scraped raw. "Because you were leaving," he said. "And once you left, you were going to come back as somebody bigger than all of us. Bigger than me." I knew it. There are answers that heal and answers that simply clarify the shape of the wound. That was one of the second kind. He had not lied because of confusion or panic or some single bad decision he regretted the next day. He had lied because my becoming visible threatened the version of himself he needed to believe in. He had built his place in the family on being the easy choice, the obvious one, the child who fit the script, and the moment it looked like I might step outside the part assigned to me, he burned the stage down. "So you destroyed my life to protect your role in it," I said. He covered his face with one hand and whispered, "I'm sorry." I believed he meant it. I also knew meaning it changed absolutely nothing about what the apology was worth on its own. My parents asked to speak with me in a family consultation room that afternoon, a sterile little space with pale walls and uncomfortable chairs designed for terrible conversations. I went because I wanted clarity, not because they had earned access to it. My mother was crying before I even sat down. My father looked like a man who had spent 6 years defending a locked door, only to discover he was the one who had barred it. "We were wrong," he said. And for my father, that sentence was not small. It cost him something to say it. Still, I felt no immediate rush of relief. The child I had once been would have given anything to hear those words. The woman sitting across from him had learned how little words can do if they arrive after all the moments that needed them most. "You were," I said, "but wrong is too gentle for what this was." My mother nodded so fast it looked painful. "We want to fix it," she said. "We want to make this right." I took a breath, kept my hands folded in my lap, and gave them the only honest answer I had. "You don't get to skip to forgiveness because the truth finally made you uncomfortable." That landed. I watched it land. Then I laid out my conditions with the same voice I use in a mission briefing, clear and without room for interpretation. They would tell the truth to every relative, friend, and neighbor they had ever repeated Cole's lie to. They would go to counseling, both of them, because I was not rebuilding any relationship on the same broken architecture that failed me the first time. They would stop asking me for immediate reconciliation, as if urgency on their part erased the years on mine. And they would understand that if there was any future here at all, it would happen on my terms, at my pace, with my boundaries intact. My father started to object out of reflex, and then I watched him catch himself. That more than anything told me change might be possible, not because he had transformed, but because for once he understood that his authority had no standing in this room. Cole sent the email 3 days later. Aunt Bev made sure every relative got it, because she trusted nothing that depended on good intentions alone. I read it at my kitchen table with Noah moving quietly around the room, giving me space without leaving me alone. It was blunt in a way I had not expected from him. He admitted he had fabricated messages, lied about my training, and deliberately kept our parents from learning the truth, because he was jealous and afraid of losing his place in the family. He wrote, "Marin never abandoned us. I made sure everyone believed she had." I stared at that line for a long time. Not because it fixed anything, because seeing the lie reduced to one clean sentence made me understand how much suffering can be housed inside a few words when the wrong person says them and the right people want to believe them. The responses rolled in over the next 2 days. My grandmother called crying. A cousin I had not heard from in years sent a message that began, "I don't know how to apologize for believing him." The marina went very quiet where Cole was concerned. People did not make a scene. They simply stopped trusting him, which for a man who had built his whole identity on being instantly believed was punishment deeper than any family shouting match could have been. The weeks after that were not magical. My parents started counseling. My mother wrote me a letter in her own hand admitting she had chosen comfort over courage for most of my life. My father struggled with therapy and kept going anyway, which, coming from him, mattered. I met Cole twice in public places and listened to him try, awkwardly and without his usual polish, to become a person I could one day speak to without tasting bitterness. I did not forgive him. Not then. Maybe not ever in the way people usually mean that word. But I also did not let hatred become the organizing principle of my life. I had already given enough years to other people's decisions. The final shift, the one that told me something real had changed, happened on an ordinary Sunday morning when my parents came to my house for breakfast for the first time. No speeches. No dramatic embrace. My mother stood in my kitchen holding a bag of oranges like she needed a job for her hands. And my father, after looking around the room for a moment too long, asked me if there was anything he could do. There are moments that sound small, unless you know the history. That was one of them. I handed him 4 plates and pointed toward the table. "You can set those out," I said. He took them carefully and counted them once before placing them down. 4 plates. Not a restored childhood, not a clean ending. Just a table, a boundary, and a door I opened myself. For a very long time, I thought justice would have to look like revenge to feel real. It turned out justice looked more like this: becoming someone they could no longer erase, then deciding for myself who got invited back into the life I built without them. Thank you so much for staying with me all the way to the end of this story. If it touched you in any way, please leave a comment and tell me what part stayed with you the most. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you won't miss the next story. Your support truly means everything. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.